It's time to set the record queer. In life, as in Photoshop, please work non-destructively. Welcome to Setting the Record Queer, a podcast where queer people talk about the pursuits and communities they love. This is episode 26, and it's about photo restoration. My name is Alexis, my pronouns are it, its, and she, her, and I'm one of your hosts.
My name's Kaylee, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm your other host.
Hi, Kaylee. It's been several weeks since our last recording, and I'm still dying, so that's
There's any coughing in that episode that gets missed by the editor, that's why.
Yeah. Ideally, y'all can't hear any of it, but be well assured, it's there. It's in your heart and also in my throat.
What have we even been up to since the last episode? I mean, we've had like a parade of house guests over the past 2 weeks, so mostly just that.
We got to see a whole bunch of friends and do a whole bunch of stuff, and it was really great. And I got to kiss a pretty girl, so that was great. In addition to the one I normally kiss,
Hi, I'm your wife.
Life's good. Hi, wife. I love you. Life's good is what I'm saying.
I played a lot of Fire Emblem, and that's about it.
Speaking of Switch games that came out, Air Memories of Old came out for Switch the other day. One of my favorite video games. A really incredible, unique experience for Switch, PS4, and PC that you should play. Please, oh my god, play it. It's really good. You get to be a bird girl and there's blocky foxos. It's great. It came out on Switch and there was about a maybe 4-hour period where I could have played it after Kaylee finished Fire Emblem 3 Houses and before Astral Chain came out, and I was sleeping then. So favorite game in the world came out on my favorite console and I still haven't played it, but oh well. You should play it since I cannot. Is what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, you're not taking the Switch back for quite some time.
I'm not gonna see the light of Nintendo Switch for a number of weeks, and I accept that.
Well, you could always take a photograph of the Nintendo Switch, but it might get damaged over time.
Yeah, that's true.
Only there was someone who could fix your photograph of the Nintendo Switch in this very, very natural segue that, best one yet. Best one we've ever done.
Yeah, it sure would be good if I can, take a photo of my Nintendo Switch and keep it close to my heart for the, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 weeks where I wouldn't be able to use it. And keep it in good shape. Yes. 300 or 400 years, you know. And, well, listeners, this is Alexis from 300 or 400 years in the future, reporting in to let you know that is where the magic of photo restoration comes in.
Sorry we haven't uploaded an episode in 300 or 400 years, by the way.
We've been recording this one the entire time.
I've been here for ages.
Trust me, the joke was worth that payoff. Don't you agree?
Why don't you introduce yourself? We've had you sitting here quietly for 3 centuries, so yeah. I think it's about time.
Hi, my name is Bo, and my pronouns are he, him. I work in Photoshop, restoring old photos.
Yeah, like my now 300-year-old photo of a Nintendo Switch.
Like that.
Oh yeah, retro games, am I right?
It's retro now. Wow, we're really beating this dead horse. The horse died because it's been 300 years.
Sadly, they don't survive that long.
No.
Oh, poor horse. It lived a rich, full life, and so did its children.
But hey, thanks to our support on Patreon, Kaylee and I have been turned into cyborgs and have been sitting here this entire time recording this podcast. We've been recording this podcast.
Years.
So, here we are. Now let's actually start this episode.
Well, for me, all of my photo restoration is done digitally. It's all in Photoshop. Oh gosh, how do I describe this? Basically, I'd say it's undoing and masking the damage that was done through time in a physical format digitally. So, what I and pretty much every Photoshop artist worth their salt will harp on religiously is that you should work non-destructively. So what that process looks like is I came up with an analogy with a video game, actually. You know how you save your progress in a video game, and you make progress that way. That way, if you accidentally die, you have a save state that you can go back to. Working non-destructively in Photoshop is basically that, only a lot more complicated. But it's creating save states and, like, little just a little safety net for yourself. That way, if you accidentally change something that you change your mind on, you don't want to change, you can just go back to that and grab parts of the original photo. Whereas working destructively in Photoshop would be starting off your original image and making a bunch of changes to that original image and not having any backups whatsoever. So if you go down the line and you realize, oh, I shouldn't have covered this part up, tough! You have to start over. So that's working non-destructively is a huge part of just the process in general. It's complicated, basically.
How did you get started doing photo restoration?
Good question. In one of my college classes for my graphic design degree, we actually had a segment that was restoring old photos, and my teacher was excellent. He taught me a lot of things in the photo editing side of Photoshop when I had previously been using it mostly just for illustration. And I realized, ooh, I really, really like this. It was really rewarding and enjoyable to see an older, really damaged, torn up photo be restored to something that you could look at without being distracted by the damage, and to see what it might have looked like originally. I just found that really, really rewarding, and I started basically thrifting old photos from antique shops or thrift stores and just trying to see what I could do with them.
And how did you get from that to this is your job right now?
I would love it to be my job, but it's still, for me, a hobby, but again, a really enjoyable hobby. Basically, I'm hoping to build up kind of a portfolio of restored photos in the hopes that if somebody needs a photo restored and wants to pay me, they'll know who to turn to.
Well, do you take commissions right now?
I would, definitely.
Well, you heard that, people listening.
If you've got photos of all of your retro gaming consoles, like your Nintendo Wii 37s.
They got real lazy with those names.
Yeah, I mean, if you have photos of your, like, great-great-grandparents playing, like, their
Xbox.
super Nintendos.
Their Xbox One.
You say Nintendo is getting creative, but wow, we're really hitting the creativity out of the ballpark right now. Just repeating words. That's great. That's also half of my sense of humor because I'm autistic and have echolalia in some really weird ways. So I think it's clear that you have a pretty wide base of, like, photo restoration experience. So why don't you tell us about some of the projects you've done and what sort of techniques you've learned and advanced throughout your, like, growth through this medium and this practice? And, like, what sort of problems or challenges each of these photos that you've worked on has represented?
So each photo is an individual, and each photo is going to need different skills to deal with the unique kind of damages or subject matter that it presents to me. So, like, stains have a very different way I deal with them rather than crease in a photo would. Everything is kind of similar. I use a lot of similar tools, but the way I use those tools really differs. Like, for example, I was doing one with a stain, I believe, and I used a patch, I believe, only on the corners of the stain, because if you look at an old photo with a stain on it, it tends to just have this discoloration around the edges of it. So it's important to be able to get in certain places using a single tool. I've had to learn to be able to be conservative with my restoration, because there's a lot of information in an image, and you don't necessarily need to cover up everything with things that you think you're fixing. So I've learned a lot that less can be more, if that makes any sense.
No, that was good.
Okay.
So one thing you mentioned was different kinds of photos, like of the subject matter.
Yes.
And how that changes how you're working with them. So do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. So faces are very difficult to work with because, you know, they're the thing that most people are drawn to in a photo. They really have to be as good as they possibly can. So especially if you have eyes that are maybe missing, it can be really difficult to try and replace that because there's nothing else from the image that I can sample in order to patch that. Whereas if it was a hole in a tree, say, you can sample from all the leaves in the other parts of the image, no problem, but you really have to be more precise with faces. So what I might wind up doing is sampling from another image that has a left eye that looks similar enough to the right eye that I'm trying to fill, and I may wind up creating a patch from that instead. I know I'm talking about eyes a lot, but they're very important. So what I usually wind up doing is creating a mask that has a very, very sharp, contrasted filter on it, and applying that to the eyes and to the edges of the face and the nose and just all the details in the face, or maybe fingers that I might want to pick up, and just leaving that sharp contrasty math on those specific places just so that those details come across more. It's really not good in a portrait to have blurry eyes because there's something that people are really going to want to look at. But whereas things like trees or bushes or cars, things like that, I may want to do that as well, but I would pick out a lot different areas depending on what I was doing to have that sharp contrast type of thing. But it's really, really important with faces.
So you've mentioned patching and masking as two of your sort of like Photoshop tools. Can you explain what you're doing with those and how those sort of work for the non-photo editing experience? Like how those work and what sort of effect they're having in a more general manner, I guess.
Yes. So patching, basically think of like a patch you would apply to clothing. It's a whole different sort of chunk of an image of information that's applied over your image. Like, what was I saying earlier with the stain? Like, I patched a stain in one of my photos that was discolored, and I basically took a chunk of the image from a different spot that was similar, and kind of copied that and applied it as a patch over that discolored area to just kind of camouflage it more. As for masks, I'm not sure how to describe that. Try say you just cut a picture out of a magazine, just an 8.5 by 11 page, and then you cut another of that page, and it was the exact same size, and you just cut a couple of holes out of that magazine on top. That would sort of be like a mask. You're only allowing certain parts of that background to come through. So that's what masks are doing in Photoshop. If you have a certain layer and you only want, say, a piece of it to show through, then you would apply a mask to that layer. And again, that goes back into working non-destructively, whereas if you were just erasing everything besides those certain parts, then that image data is destroyed for everything but those certain parts. If you have a mask, you can apply the masks, you can take them off again, and you can still have that data, even if it's not showing currently.
So I guess just to sort of help expand on this, since I have a little bit of Photoshop experience, and then also, basically the principle behind masks is it allows you to like have two versions of a thing and edit only parts of that thing in a certain way. I mean, you mentioned filtering, yeah? Is that sort of how it works?
Yes, I'd say so.
Okay, I don't know if that was any clearer, but
It's difficult to describe.
just gotta go download a photo editing tool and try it until you figure it out. Don't do that. Photo editing is awful. Well, the tool... I'm going to clarify that. So this is one of those moments where Alexis says something really horrible and mean on the podcast. Photo editing tools are awful, and it gives me only more respect for your very cool hobby. Clarification done. Please don't cancel me. But yeah.
Oh, you got a cool hobby like doing an interview show where you interview queer guests on cool topics.
Only to make fun of their hobbies.
So, since you've started doing photo restoration, how have things changed, like, as you've improved or just as the tools have become more available, become updated and more available, if anything? It might be that nothing has really been all that different.
Oh gosh, I've changed a lot, I feel. I feel like the tools haven't changed that I'm using a whole lot. There hasn't been any major updates to Photoshop that I've necessarily found useful to photo restoration, but I will go back to old restorations and say, oh god, this looks bad. What did I do? What did I do to this picture? And I think it's mostly that I've developed more of an eye for the levels of midtones and highlights and dark spots in a photo and what looks balanced. Previously, I was doing a lot of too dark or too bright, too washed out, and now I feel like I've developed my eye more to where I can get a more balanced looking photo.
That's sort of an interesting thought, because I feel like when a lot of people sort of conceive of photo restoration, they think of it very much as a science. But there's sort of that artistic angle to it too, of balancing the elements of a photo. It's like touching up a painting in a way. Is that accurate?
Oh, it's definitely not a science. I think it's definitely an art. There's only so much that you can do scientifically, I think, before you really have to start relying on your experience as like a painter or an illustrator. If you have a section of a photo that's completely wiped out and you need to maybe fill in a really tiny patch that you can't sample anywhere else from, you literally have to go back and paint in those details. You have to just kind of make judgment calls, and I don't think any of those judgment calls can really be described as a science. I think it really is all of an art.
Even more art than originally expected. That would also be that. There's a podcast idea. More art than originally expected. I'm not going to expand on this topic at all, but I feel like that's something I would listen to.
Trademark that before somebody gets it.
It'll become Setting the Record Queer's sister show. I mean, hey, if anyone...
Alternatively, if we don't trademark it and someone else makes it, then we have a podcast to listen to because we're not doing a second podcast.
Yeah. That's real good smart right there, babe. See, that's why I married Kaylee. She does the good smart.
I don't have the idea, but I sure do be there while the idea is had and take the credit.
Well, anyways, speaking of our podcast's community, I suppose, to some degree, is there a community of, like, photo restorers or, like, photo restoration enthusiasts?
Not that I've been necessarily able to find, unfortunately. I feel like photo restoration kind of falls under the umbrella of basically Photoshop editing, so I'm sure there is there is a very large community for Photoshop editing. Not necessarily one that I take part of, but it is definitely out there, just not necessarily that niche, unfortunately.
Let's actually then, since normally this is where I would ask, like, okay, how's being queer in that community? I'm gonna actually take that question and sort of remix it a little. Restore it to something more correct and relevant to this podcast. I feel like, and I'm kind of, my eyes are on the thing we're going to be looking at for the performance showcase in a bit as sort of an example, but I've also looked through your portfolio. With this photo restoration, you said you literally just like go to thrift stores and try to find old photographs, and a lot of that comes very inherently tied to like, a photograph is in a lot of ways a way people want it to be presented, and it sort of comes with those cultural ideas from the time. So how is it working on these very old and sometimes very, very like cis heteronormative, ye old society values photos as a queer photo restorer?
That's a really, really good question. When I'm restoring, I find it a really, really meditative process, especially when I'm doing portraits of people. I spend a lot of time as I'm getting to know this photo, just thinking about this person and their life. If they're still alive, even, I spend a lot of time thinking of maybe was this person queer, even? Did they have a queer community that they felt comfortable in, or did they remain closeted their whole life? It's just a really meditative and reflective process on this person's life and possibly even whether they were like me.
All right, that's really interesting. Well, I'm glad I randomly thought to ask a very left field question, because that was interesting.
So, if someone is listening to this podcast right now and they're sitting there like, I want to find a photo, destroy it, and then restore it, because I assume that's how you do it. I assume you break it and build it back better than
Absolutely.
ever.
We all know the most important part of a photo restorer's toolkit is the coffee they make every morning to spill on photos.
How did you know my secrets?
Well, sometimes you're just like throwing your old photos in an oven to try to find a secret on the back of them, like in the classic film National Treasure with Nicolas Cage. We have gotten... This is one of the silliest we've ever been as hosts.
For such a, serious topic... I guess not, serious topic, but, very... There's a seriousness to it, not like a no fun allowed, but it's a serious topic. And yet we're just absolutely goofing off.
Well, I think it's a lot more like... It's a lot more of like a classical thing. It's been around a lot longer than a lot of the other things we talk about, and it's less talked about in a lot of public spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to take some examples from older ones, if you say you're talking about like a visual artist or someone who makes music, like those are things we talk about all the time and think, and like, yeah, those are cool things, but we just don't give as much thought to photo restoration.
Yeah, when I initially took the class from my professor, he showed us an example in a textbook of this old photo that he'd restored, and it was printed out there, and nobody ever really thinks of, hey, this photo was probably really damaged before it got scanned and put in this textbook. It's there, it's kind of everywhere we see old photos that are reproduced for print. It's just not something that people tend to think about.
Yeah. But anyways, once people are done, making their morning coffee to spill on their photograph, and they have a newly ruined photograph to restore, what sort of, resources or tools or basic techniques should they look for to get started? What advice would you give yourself when you were taking that college course now?
Oh gosh, That's a really good question because I haven't found many resources specific to photo restoration digitally. What I would suggest, just as a basic starting out point, is getting to know the tools. So, things like the clone stamp tool are essential for patching specks and dust and creases, things like that. If you know no other patching tools, then clone stamp is gonna be your best friend, as well as the first two steps that I use, which I see the most dramatic results from and is the most satisfying in my opinion in that first like 5 minutes of opening a photo, is adjusting the levels of the photo and making it black and white, which you'd think old photos, it's already black and white, but it usually yellows and discolors in age, and you need to make it actually black and white by the program's definition. So making it black and white and then adjusting the levels of the photo, which the levels, how to describe, there are a certain number of pixels in the photo that are very dark, sort of mid-tone, and very light, and sometimes the levels are off in that photo, like they are in old photos that are very, very faded. So a levels adjustment layer will kind of fix that if you toy with it. You can slide the sliders up so that these very lightish midtones are actually now very dark, how they should be, and adjust the highlights so that these faded out or weathered whites are now crisp, nice, bright whites. So that is probably where I would bare minimum start out if anyone would like to get into photo restoration.
Yeah, that sounds like a fun thing.
Homework to me.
Well, what I like about that is that it sounds like very much the kind of thing that if you're sitting here listening to this podcast, if you're on your computer now or when you get home tonight, like you can like kind of just play with it and try it out and see if it's something you enjoy. Like it's one of those ones where you don't need to do a lot to kind of dip your feet in at the bare minimumist level to kind of give yourself way in, and that's always fun.
Yeah, I mean, even like paint.net has levels and color adjustments and clone stamping. And paint.net is very free, and in some ways it shows that it's free, but it is free and you can use it.
I use it like all the time.
Me too. I use Photoshop for a random assortment of stuff, but there are some tasks that I don't want to sit through Photoshop's 30-second loading time for. So I'll just open paint.net and be done before Photoshop would have even loaded, which is pretty great.
As someone who uses paint.net, I love that paint.net's thing, every time you open something, turns anti-aliasing on by default. So if you try to draw a pixel, it's like, nope, we're going to anti-alias this 16 by 16 picture.
This pixel is going to have friends, and there's nothing you can do about it.
The paint fill tool is just going to ruin your picture. But anyway, this is off topic. What I meant to ask was, so besides a certain thing that we're going to get to in a second, what do you have in the pipeline, both in terms of things you're working on right now and longer term goals?
Oh boy, right now I still have kind of a backlog of photos that I'm doing. I basically have thrifted them, scanned them, stored them away, and now they're just kind of sitting in files waiting to be gotten to. What do I have that's interesting right now? Ooh, I had one that had a queer vibe to it that what I was very excited about. It's this young woman in a forest setting. It looks like she's just had like a candid photo or is like posing for her friend, and she's gorgeous. I'm very bi for her. She's probably like 100 years old right now, but I'm still, listen. It's a snapshot in time. I'm valid, okay. But
So, feel free to use our podcast as a missed connections article. I feel like in order to future-proof this episode, I should say that please do not use our podcast as a missed connections.
Oh gosh, but I spent a lot of time when I was looking at it's a set of 2 photos, and she's in slightly different poses in each. I just spent a lot of time, like, thinking, who's behind that camera? Is it, maybe she has a girlfriend? I don't know. It just had, like, a vibe to me, and I'm still excited about it.
Well, I for one am looking forward to the lesbian romance you've divined here, hidden in this story of an old photo. That's pretty good.
Forest romance.
But we have one of your other works in progress, actually, that we're going to be talking about in our performance showcase. So on every episode of this podcast, we like to feature one of our guests' works in whatever form that may take, to sort of hone in on the details and really talk about what goes into making or doing whatever it is they make or do. So for this episode, we have a before and after of a photo that you're working on. And again, this is a work in progress, but I mean, even in the state it's in, this is an unbelievable difference. I'm really excited to talk about this. Okay, so we have 2 images here, and I'll just give a quick description. These will be linked in the show notes. Okay, so yeah, we have 2 photos here, and what the photo, both versions naturally is it's a partial family portrait, I believe, of 4 children. They're all dressed in a way that at least we today would describe, I think, as feminine. Lots of lace, lots of layers, mostly white, but one of them is wearing black, except for part of it's white. They're really intricate and very, like, old-timey TM clothes, but basically they're all sort of, like, sitting or standing and posed together, looking sort of slightly off away from the camera because family photography. It's sort of framed around with a little border, and at the bottom, there's a nice fancy little logo stamp that says 571 Fulton Street, Thompson, Brooklyn, New York, which is presumably where this photo studio is, or more likely was. And now, the first photo is completely yellowed. It is covered in speckles of white, total information loss. There's some stains in both top corners. It's a mess. It's a mess. And then the second photo is night and day difference. It's completely black and white. Most of the speckling has been completely cleaned up. Not all of it quite yet. And it's much easier to see the details on all of the people really, both on their clothes and their faces. It's definitely still a work in progress. There's still a fair amount of speckling, especially in some of the, like, high detail areas, but it's coming along really nicely. I am looking forward to seeing this when it's done as well. So yeah, go look in the show notes to see both photos. See the comparison for yourself. It is literally night and day. Both in the metaphorical sense and also in the sense that one of them is yellow and the other is black and white.
So while you were describing the photo, before we get into the process of this, I just want to say that I Googled 571 Fulton Street in Brooklyn, New York, which is the address here, and it is now it doesn't actually have a Google thing, and and the name of the store is covered by a tree, unfortunately.
Oh,
but
man.
I think it's Blue Eagles uniforms in Brooklyn, New York.
Well, hey, Kaylee and I will be in New York City next week, and let's just go find it.
Okay. Yeah, let's why don't we put a picture in the show notes of us taking a selfie in front of this random building in Brooklyn?
Great, let's do it.
Okay, yeah. Apparently they repair jewelry and watch batteries.
You know, and all the time I've had this photo, I have not thought to Google the dang address. If you could find this place in New York and send me a picture of what it is now, I would be thrilled.
It's definitely some kind of clothing store. I can make out the words blue and uniforms from beyond the tree. I think it's Blue Eagles uniforms. Yeah, well, yeah, sure. Let's go here. Let's go here. We're gonna be in NYC. Let's go here, take a selfie in front, and we'll both send you a picture of this place and put it in the show notes.
Be excellent.
It's gonna be great. This is gonna be a setting the record queer adventure.
This is the first time we've ever gone to a physical location for an episode, with the exception of rewriting the record.
Field scouting. We are breaking new ground for setting the record queer. I mean, I don't know if I ever mentioned this on the podcast. I did actually go to Jackie. If you remember Jackie way back from our episode on tattooing, I actually went to her tattoo studio and I got to meet her, and that was great.
But we should probably get back on topic.
But that was well after. Anyways, we'll go field scouting this coming weekend, and you'll probably see a picture of us in front of this place in the show notes.
I look forward to it.
So let's talk about these photos. Let's start with so when you first got this photo and presumably scanned it, what was going through your head?
For me, when I first picked up this photo in the store, I thought, oh, this is absolutely trashed. I want this as the focal piece of my portfolio. Literally, that is what went through my head. There wasn't any kind of doubt that I could do it. I figured I could do it. It was just going to be very, very tedious, but it was going to look real impressive if I could pull it off.
So, in a weird way, the fact that it was so bad was almost good for you. It was just this perfect opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's weird. I tend to be more drawn to the really trashed pictures in thrift stores and in antique stores, just because they provide a challenge.
I mean, that makes sense. All right, cool. You get the photo, you scan it. I guess you've already talked about sort of the beginning of your process with doing the levels and the colors. So you do that. What's the first thing you start looking to start really getting into the details and repairing it?
For me, it's just a really kind of under a microscope look at the photo. Just kind of getting to know it, getting to know what the damage is, what I'm dealing with. Like you mentioned, there were stains in the upper right and upper left, upper or lower left as well. I don't really...
Yeah, I mean, the more I look at it, there's just stains everywhere.
It's everywhere. Ironically, my least favorite thing to deal with is stains, but I digress. Again, just getting to really know this photo and to know what kind of damage I'm dealing with, just to inform my own process and how I'm going to go about fixing it. Like for all of the larger spots of white, of total photo loss, I made use of the patch tools for many of the smaller spots, especially in very fine, difficult details that were difficult to sample from other places. I made a lot of use of the clone stamp tool, and I think there was a spot in the chair that I actually hand painted back in, just very carefully picking from the values. Next step is basically just getting to know the photo and the damage.
All right, well, let's just keep going. So you put it under a microscope, you start to do some of the pattern replacement. What's next?
More of that, basically, until it looks nicer. Basically, a lot of the middle of the photo restoration is just the same thing of just replacing areas of loss, of miscoloration. I don't get to really sharpening the image and going into fine details of levels work until the end. I'm still not at that in this photo yet, but hopefully when I get a couple more of these spots filled in, I will get to be there soon, because that's kind of like the finishing touches of a piece. It's where you get to really see the eyes of the portraits brought out. It's where you get to see all of the little details in their dresses and their frocks really stand out sharply, and you really get to appreciate all of the fine details in this photo.
Is there any specific spot on the photo that you've done so far that you could, maybe tell a story about, or just point out, this was challenging or this was interesting? Anything you think worth talking about?
So towards the bottom of the child on the very far left's dress, there is what looks like almost somebody took a coin and just scratched a bunch of zigzags into the bottom hem of this person's dress. that was definitely kind of a challenge to repair, just because the damage was very extensive. Thankfully, there wasn't a pattern there, so I could make use, mostly I think, of the, what did I use? I used a bunch of patch tool, and I used the clone stamp tool, but the bodice of this person's dress was what was significantly more challenging. If you look very closely at it, it has this line detail going vertically down. It was very limited in the spaces that I could resample from, just because it's such a small area of the image. Just trying to fill that white space with pieces that were already there. I was very limited in what I could use. So I don't think I had repainted any of their bodice, but what I did is very, very slow and steady and just calculated work with the patch and the clone stamp tool. It's almost worked kind of like puzzle pieces, just finding things that would fit and not look egregious, or I don't even know if I'm using that word right. Just finding things that could fit and not look out of place. Yeah, that was definitely challenging, but I'm really, really satisfied with the result that I got on the bodice of the dress. I feel like it looks almost original.
I mean, it looks really, really good. I've just been kind of tabbing back and forth on the before and after here.
Thank you.
I'm impressed. For sure. All right, well, cool. With that, I guess we will move on to our listener questions. For every episode of this podcast, we like to take questions from you, our listeners, to give to us and to our guests. You can ask us questions on our Twitter at STRQueercast, via email, settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com, or in our Setting the Record Queer community Discord at bit.ly/STRQcord, all lowercase on that one.
Our first question comes from Amelia in Discord. What about the end result makes it worth all the work? What makes it all worth it personally?
Oh god, that's a fantastic question. Thank you. Ah, man. It's kind of just... Have either of you watched, like, really satisfying painting restoration of old artisans' masterworks on YouTube? It's almost like that for me. I get this immense satisfaction out of seeing something that's really, really trashed go to something that you can really look past the damage and see the original photo for what it was. It's just a personal satisfaction I get from really improving something and basically restoring someone else's work to what they had originally intended. Just, it's really, really personally satisfying to me.
Oh, that's, yeah, that sure does answer that question well. I don't know what else to say. Sometimes when you ask a question and you get exactly what you wanted, you're just like, yep.
Yeah, honestly, one of the hardest parts of doing this podcast is like when our guests give really good answers, and then you just have to sit there like, okay, cool, great, next question. I totally sound like I don't care, but really, I just thought that was a good answer.
I just don't have anything to add or anything more to try to pry out of you because you did a good job. All right, well, I think in that case, we'll move on to my favorite segment of the podcast, Kaylee's Question of the Week. Now, Kaylee's Question of the Week is kind of just the same deal as the rest of the podcast, but the questions in all play, so to speak. You know, they're kind of the same sort of questions you might find on, like, if you ever just, like, dug underneath your house and found a skeleton in your basement and the skeleton's mouth opened and went, "What is the name of the 4th president of the Secret Skeleton Society?" That's pretty much what we're in the boat for, you know, same as the rest of the program. Do you have an answer for that question? Because your finger's raised.
That's extremely worryingly specific.
I'm going with Jimmy Bonesworth.
So, I don't know how video games knowledgeable you are, but just in case you're not, or someone listening is not either, in the popular video game Super Mario 64, Mario goes to various worlds by jumping into paintings. If you could restore a photo so well that you could Mario 64 into it, what would you want the photo to be
Holy
of?
that's excellent. That's a great question. Oh, I'm unprepared for this.
That's okay, we can go first.
I mean, I still need an answer too.
You knew it in advance, you have no excuse.
Nope, no, I don't.
I would like to jump into, like... I would like to jump into a photo where there's, a big just fountain of infinite, like, infinite, like, delicious food. That can't leave the photo, so I can eat as much as I want, and then leave, and come back and eat more.
Does really open up a question about how the physics of this sort of thing would work.
Don't worry about it.
That's probably the best answer to that good question.
Or I would go to an alien planet where there are new species to be discovered, a planet with air that's breathable and habitable for humans, please. But I would love to go somewhere that is completely not accessible on Earth. And just kind of have a space exploration moment. I'm really into sci-fi, so it would be really, really cool to get to live out some of the fantastic worlds that I've read in books.
Oh god, now I need to come up with like a good answer to top all of
No,
that.
you don't. When have we ever needed to come up with good answers? We're not the guests.
Okay, alright, well, I'm gonna be boring and practical. I'm gonna go get a picture of myself from, like, when I was, like, 10, jump back through it, and go bash her on the head and be like, "You are a girl! Assert your needs!"
I feel like you might cause some time paradoxes with that one.
Don't worry about it. You very specifically said,
Fair
we're not
point.
worrying about how this would work. So I'm not worrying about how this would work.
You know, you got a point there.
Like, look, if I was given this opportunity, I would want to take advantage of it.
Okay. Anyway, yeah, I think that about does it for this week. Thank you so much for being on this podcast, Mo.
Yeah, this was really good. You did a really good job talking about a
Thank
topic
you.
that, like, is hard to talk about, I feel like. And so we really appreciate it.
You've mentioned that you have a portfolio.
I do, yes. So I have a professional Twitter that I really like to just post updates about what kind of projects that I'm doing. It is Ambrose Hefner at Twitter. I'm not sure if that's how at Twitter works, but you know, it's on Twitter. It's there. Ambrose is spelled Ambrose, and Hefner is spelled Heffner, as well as my portfolio website where you can see more of my work, my photo restoration work, and illustration and graphic design, which is what I'm hoping to do for a day job. It is bohportfolio.com. Again, B as in boy, O as in octopus, H as in helix, portfolio.com. Tag yourself, I'm octopus.
Ah, yes, the 3 genders. All right, well, yeah, be sure to go check out that Twitter for updates. I, for one, am really looking forward to seeing this photo that we talked about get finished. If you go to bohportfolio.com, possibly bohportfolio.com/photo editing, if that's your interest specifically, you can find a whole bunch more work samples. They're all really cool. So yeah, Bo, thank you so much. This was great. Definitely everyone go check out those links. And as well, if you liked this podcast, hey, you can find us and support, maybe consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/settingtherecordqueer. Our patrons can get early guest reveals, access to a special Discord channel, high quality or early episode releases, and even special thanks on the show. We'd like to offer those thanks to our $25 and above patrons, Jane, who you can find on Twitter as @callmecadejo, that's @callmecadejo, and American Choir Boy, who you can find on Twitch as American Choir Boy. And speaking of our Patreon, we just hit $150 a month.
Woo.
So thank you all so much for that. That's a lot of money. We really appreciate it. And we're going to keep doing this thing that we're doing, because $150 a month, I guess, is a pretty decent way to say that people like the thing that we're doing. Anyways, otherwise, besides Patreon, if you like this podcast, please subscribe or leave a review on your podcast platform. Tell a friend about us. Recommend us on social media. You can find us on Twitter @STRQueercast or via email settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com, or come hang out in our Setting the Record Queer community Discord at bit.ly/STRQcord, all lowercase. In the Discord, you can find us hosts, other Setting the Record Queer listeners, and even some of STRQ's past guests and technical production people that have decided to grace the Discord with their presence. You know, if you want to send our editor compliments on her editing job, or our artist compliments on our podcast art, that's the place you can do that. Just saying. Those are things you should do. Wink, wink. Nudge, nudge. While you're there, ask questions for us or for our guests. Give us feedback. Give your answer to this week's Kaylee's Question of the Week, because we like to feature our favorite one at the end of the episode. That's coming soon. Maybe you think you should be on this podcast, or have a good idea for otherwise who or what could or should be on this podcast. Please let us know. We're always looking for ideas. The wonderful logo for this podcast was drawn by Cubotic. That's @QBTIC on Twitter, or Cobot, QOBOT.tumblr.com. The theme music and production for this podcast is done by Thrill Me Music. You can find more information about her work at thrillmemusic.squarespace.com. Kaylee, where can our listeners find you?
People can find me on Twitter at witcheshex. That's WITCHS Hex. Find me on Twitch at the same name, but with an underscore between witches and hex, for when I probably stream there at some point next month. I mean, I have to at some sooner or later, right? And you can also find updates on the game I'm developing, SoulSync, at SoulSync Game. That's SOULSYNC Game. By the time this episode airs, there will definitely be an update posted there, so look out for that.
And you can find me on Twitter and Twitch, believe it or not. I've actually been starting to stream again a little bit recently. And both of those are now at Double Gear SYS, as in Double Gear System. As well, you can find my Final Fantasy XIV virtual photography Instagram account at instagram.com/echo, EKHO_white. So go look out for all that stuff. Go check out SoulSync. I'm always excited for updates. I like watching her work on the game, just like laying in bed while she's on her computer.
You do, you know a bunch of stuff they don't.
Yeah, I do, and it's great. Our favorite answer to last week's Kaylee's Question of the Week, which was if they were to make a Line Rider 2 HD remaster, The Line's Revenge, and it's good now.
Dream drop distance.
Dream drop distance. Add one feature to it. What would you want that feature to be? From Pi in our Discord, Pi suggested a game mode called Line Rider Does Your Taxes, unlike Yoshi. Our next episode is going to be all about Tetris. Look forward to that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you all so much for listening. We will see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.